Hey everyone, welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm Jared Walton, and today we've got Joanna Nelius, right?
Yeah, Nelius. Yeah,
I used to say Nelius, and then I heard you correct it, pronounce it properly. I was like, oh, I've been saying that in my head wrong the whole time.
because it doesn't have like the English pronunciation. It's more like the German pronunciation.
That's right. So we're here today to talk about AI some, the good, the bad, the ugly, the plagiarized, whatever. And also Stable Diffusion. So that's my shtick. I test GPUs. I worry about AI on some level, or I think about it on some level, but I don't like. I mean, AI is not going to replace what I do unless you've got a robot switching graphics cards and running the benchmarks.
Yeah. Hmm.
But I also, it's interesting to look at how these current AI algorithms perform. So I've run Stable Diffusion tests on a bunch of graphics cards, and we'll talk about those. But yeah, Joanna, what are you up to these days?
What am I up to these days? I'm doing the same thing as you, testing graphics cards and more laptops and processors and CPUs, and basically just trying to grow our tech and gaming section over at Reviewed.
You
Kind
get
of,
to do it all.
I get to do it all. Woohoo! Yeah, no,
How many
um,
AIs have you hired to help you?
zero,
Wow, that's amazing.
zero. We'll get into why later.
There's lots of problems. Oh yeah, we've got lots of things to discuss. Let's see. I don't know. Should we? I'll start with Stable Diffusion since that's my
Yeah.
comfort area. We'll show some slides and we can get into the other ethical stuff and other things going on. So Stable Diffusion, open sourced. There's some other similar tools that are also out there, and you can generate images with a prompt. I don't remember the exact prompt I used here. It was something like a robot staring out over a destroyed city. And this might look okay, but I generated like 50 images to find this one that looked okay because there's a
Hmm.
bunch where it's like there's a robot and then there's a robot head floating in the air or an arm floating disembodied or the robot doesn't look like a robot or the city doesn't look right. I mean, like there's all sorts of errors, but I mean, it's as a generative tool, I'm like, it's pretty amazing what it can accomplish. I'm not sure it's better than real art, and it's derived from real art. And how do you differentiate between those? Like, without the humans that fed it all this art, what would it create? Another picture here, my flooded city picture. Again, generated 50 or so images, picked one that I liked. If you looked closely at the people or things floating in the water, you're like, that doesn't quite look like an actual human. It's this weird zomboid, but so it can do some impressive stuff. That's on the art side, And there's also this Chat GPT has been big in the news, or similar. CNET did their AI thing, and 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 that's where it gets messy because, like, if you go to an image and you say, "Is this plagiarized?" That can be tricky with an image, but when you're talking about sentences and you find the same sentences and contents popping up almost verbatim in an AI written article, you start going, well, that's a legal quagmire. I mean, I know of people, I don't know the people, but I know of people who have been fired for plagiarizing on tech news sites. It happens probably more than we would like, and the AI plagiarized horribly. So, uh, anyway, give me what do you got for me right now? What do you think? Where are we going?
Where are we going with this? I
Uh,
mean, so
you
like,
you teach, right? You teach creative writing, or
yeah, I mean, I did for 5 years. Had to take a break when I became the senior editor of the electronics section at Review, because just time wise. It's kind of funny that this comes up now because one of the classes that I taught was basically writing about technology and science. and basically using technological tools to inform your work. At the time, we spent one class period like experimenting with the GPT-3 protocol, and this was like spring semester 2021 or the year before. I don't remember.
This was before ChatGPT got released to the wild, right?
Yes, yes, yes. But the um but we weren't using GPT. I think the name of the program was AI Dungeon, and it essentially used the GPT-3 to generate lines of dialogue, descriptions based off of whatever you put into it. So we used it to generate kind of like mock stories and to, just kind of go through how it felt using an AI program tool to inform your writing. And the general consensus was like, yeah, this is a cool piece of tech, but it hindered more than like enhanced the creative process, because your brain just kind of got stuck in like, what, that makes absolutely no sense, right? And then so it's like you have to go back and edit and edit and edit and edit again, and of course the majority, like the editing process can generally be longer than the writing one. So from that perspective alone, it's like, how much time are you actually saving? And are we doing a great disservice to a bunch of up and coming writers, not to mention the established writers, or the aspiring writers, and whatever type of writer you are? Like, what is the potential ramifications of using this technology actually in the business world? And we've already been starting to see that with the big debacle over at CNET. Like, I just can't believe that they did that and had nobody even check it. Because if you were to go in and check it, it would take you a significant amount of time to edit. And I don't know about you, but the majority of writers that I work with, I do not spend that much time checking over their work. Like, they get it done right the first time, and maybe there's some sentence structure flow that's like really weird, that we kind of
Burying the lead.
yeah, exactly. So coming from like we're in similar backgrounds in tech journalism, like we do hands-on product reviews, we run a bunch of numbers, we crunch them, like we look at them, and we have to analyze, like, all right, what does this mean in the current market compared to the competitor and old graphics cards and everything else. Could that potentially be automated if the data was already there? Probably at some point, right? But at the same time, it's taking away jobs. Like, CNET took away jobs from people who could have been writing that. And the way I kind of more or less got my start in this industry was taking on some of that grunt work. Unfortunately, with the way that newsrooms are, where everybody's chronically understaffed and underpaid, so it kind of makes sense why this would be an extremely attractive option to companies, right?
For the venture
But
capitalists.
venture capitalists, right? But it's like, it's with all technology that functions as a tool, right?
Yeah.
Anybody can take it and use it for good and evil. And I would be way more enthusiastic about this technology if I didn't if all these mass media layoffs weren't happening simultaneously, right? And if BuzzFeed's stock didn't shoot up the second investors saw, like, oh, we're going to pivot to this. And it's like, but
We're going to cut costs by firing 12% of our workforce or whatever it was.
Exactly. So if this becomes a trend, then all these jobs get cut down and whittled away. And as I mentioned, we're already chronically understaffed and underpaid. So if venture capitalists want to, ruin journalism this way, what is going to be left for us in the future? What is going to be left for future generations? And what in the heck am I supposed to tell my former students every time they come to me and ask, Miss Nelius, how do I break into writing for a living? If you would have asked me that 4 or 5 years ago, I would have had an easier answer. Now I'm like, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know.
and I mean, like, just to give you an example, so we'll do this live. Write an introductory paragraph to the best graphics cards. Now, granted, this is ChatGPT. It's trained on models that expire. Well, they don't expire. They're 2 years old basically, so it's not going to talk about a 4090 or a 4080. But graphics cards, also known as GPUs, are an essential component for any computer that is used for gaming or other graphics-intensive tasks. Okay, that's fine. They are responsible for rendering the images and videos on your screen, and a high-performance GPU can make a big difference in the visual quality and smoothness of your gaming experience. All the best graphics cards currently on the market offer exceptional performance, high resolution, okay, and smooth graphics, and are suitable for even the most demanding games and applications. Some examples include, here we go, the 3080, 6800 XT. So that is probably sounds pretty reasonable to me. A few word tweaks here and there would be fine. It does sound a little stiff, and then the question is like, how would that pass a plagiarism check? And I think a lot about like these tools like ChatGPT. And I'm like, if you were to look at calculators, woo, this high performance calculators. This is my son's from school, and he's in 7th grade, and so he might use it to do basic math on occasion. But I'm like, no, you need to learn how to do the math manually and think about numbers and get this number sense and this idea in your head rather than just punching it in a calculator. I'm like, well, we've got high school essays, junior high essays, writing, all that stuff. Like, if you can go to ChatGPT and it can do a better job than a 12th grade student, what does that tell them? And I'm like, but without the people who had been trained in the first place writing the stuff that then trained ChatGPT's model, like, it all falls apart. So I'm like, yeah, we still need people to learn these tools or learn these skills before they use the tools. Anyway,
Absolutely, yeah.
and plagiarism, again, big deal. I think, like, if you look at the not the USA Today, I'm looking at your if you look at the CNET stuff, and people started going through it and they're like, oh, there's all this plagiarized stuff. Now, granted, one of the examples I read, they were talking about it was from their bank something site, and it was about like applying for a credit card or something along those lines. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure there's a ton of generic text that is going to be similar between any article on that subject written by humans. But hopefully the humans are having their own thoughts and putting fingers to keyboard and writing it rather than looking at competitors' sites and paraphrasing them.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a big, no in our field anyways. And kind of one thing you lose, like, regardless if GPT was absolutely perfect and it did everything right, you could take it and then put it into the CMS and then pub it and then have that be fine. Even if it was absolutely perfect, right? If everybody was using the same tool to generate the same stuff from the same data set, I think there's a good chance that everything was going to sound really similar. So then you get into this situation of like, this article on CNET looks exactly like this article on BuzzFeed. Who copied the other one? Well, they used AI. Okay, great. So if every single piece of that particular thing of content looks exactly the same, then what is the point of having a single publication that you go to? Which, my dear friends, brings me to the point of journalism is so much more than just regurgitating numbers and writing how-tos and explainers, right? Like, there's tone of voice, there's personality. Like actual writers have variations in the way that they speak on the page. You know, I've always, to me, there's always been sort of this like, not lack of understanding, but um, kind of a lack of motivation to try to understand what it actually means to be a journalist, what it actually means to be a writer, right? It's not easy. It is absolutely not easy. And clearly, even an AI is having issues with it, right? Yes, we pay people to write, but we also pay them to be experts in their field. You know, if we
And to
stop,
be entertaining on some level,
I
hopefully.
know, right? You know, and I think there's this whole thing of like, if you think about the way that our journalism was maybe even 10, 20, 30 years ago, like there were some big personalities in it, right? But I think with expanding technology and the proliferation of things, you know, like streaming, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, a bunch of social media, then there becomes this creator economy, and people like Linus Tech Tips, you know, they can reach a much bigger global audience and have total control over what they do. So not only have the journalists been competing for the attention of the YouTube crowd, but now we're having to deal with like these investors looking at our jobs going like, how can we cut more of them? So, but it's like we've had to pivot to video in some instances. We've had to, you know, do exactly what we're doing right now to give people not just a reason to come to the site and like read our stuff, but we have to compete with the personalities that are out there in a visual medium from our written format. That's what
And it's
brings in
interesting,
people.
like
Yeah.
with video format, like you and I know, video is it's hard. Like if you talk about
Yeah.
writing an article and putting together a review or whatever, and you do it in text with images and charts, it takes you a certain amount of time. I probably would say, you know, a full graphics card review, assuming I have test data from every other card that I want in the article, it's a solid 40 hours of work. It's a full week,
Yeah.
sometimes more, you know, and it's like if you have to do that for video, you do all that same work, and then you have to have multiple people who are like videoing, recording
Mhm.
you on the video, editing it, splicing it together, fixing things where you say something wrong. I mean, like you make a mistake in text and you go back and you quickly edit it.
Yeah.
Video on YouTube, it's there to stay unless you pull the video. So
Yeah.
it gets more expensive, but the benefit of video for a lot of these creators is it's like I don't get paid by Nvidia or Gigabyte or Asus or AMD or any of these other companies to write and review stuff. These companies send products for review, and I have a salary from my employer, Future.
Mhm.
But if you're self-employed on YouTube, then you do get paid directly for what you say, and sometimes you have advertisers who are paying you to say stuff. I mean, it gets very
Yeah.
messy. So it's like, you know, turning over to video and saying, well, why don't we all just do video? Because AI is not able to do that very well. I mean, I've seen stuff on YouTube where I'm pretty sure someone is reading a script written by ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But actually, related to that, I love this. I'll post it in the comments. You've heard about Zero GPT? It made big waves a month or so ago.
Me? Ooh, I don't think so. Let me
Zero
see.
GPT was a tool using GPT models to detect if something was written by GPT.
Oh my God.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
It
okay.
takes a little while. I fed it through like the conclusion of one of my articles, and it said I'm probably human, so I took that as a plus. I fed it one of our freelancers news stories, and it said need more data. Which, I mean, it's funny because like one of the big tells for editing text is there's almost always grammar and spelling and punctuation mistakes when you're editing. Even the best writers, they'll make a few small errors.
Hmm.
Generally speaking, Chat GPT won't, and so it's like, well, you know, I don't know how that plays into things. But anyway,
Yeah. And I mean, there's an interesting comment from Frank Martinez in the YouTube chat. Um, I mean, yeah, like to some degree, I think maybe video and podcast like did sort of put a damper on old media. And I am assuming, Frank, by old media you mean like text based. But I think it's important to also keep in mind that this old media, if we look at it from a scientific standpoint, there is lots of studies out there that have been done on how our how our brains function when we're physically interacting with somebody, or not somebody, something, and how they react when we're just sitting in front of something watching, only passively engaging with it. And there's a lot of learning implications that go along with quote unquote favoring new technologies over old media. I think there's a lot of stuff that we have to think about that goes into the education of the younger generation, like writing, whether you're typing or physically writing with a pencil. It is a very important skill. It is viewed at by doctors as a certain milestone when you are a child, right? So if let's say like for instance, I have a specific learning disability called dysgraphia, which one of the ways that it affects me is physically writing, right? It is I just have illegible writing, really. And it affects things like grammar, spelling, stuff like that. So if we think about assistive technologies like grammar and spell check in Word or on Google Docs, that is super, super helpful, not just for me, but for everyone else, right? Who needs like a little bit of like editing help, right? While they're trying to self-edit. And that's great. Going full on, like having AI generate all that text for you, depending on how dismal we want to get with it, like if we are going to keep investing in this technology, I think we are going to see more and more instances in schools and even in jobs too, where you're not supposed to. Getting an AI is plagiarism. You're not writing it yourself, right? So I just worry that there's going to be, at the school level, there's going to be issues where schools will want to ban like the use of, let's say, typed essays, and make everybody write in those little blue books with a pencil and paper. If anybody's old enough to remember that, I've even had to do them. But when you have a writing disability like I do, that doesn't work. And so assisted technology in my case is simply a keyboard and a computer, a monitor, and spell check, that puts me at an even playing field with everybody else. What does this mean for people with learning disabilities and future job prospects? Who knows? If they're all, I mean, the industry, these venture capitalists, they are already cutting our jobs, making us do more work for the same pay. So then what happens to somebody with a learning disability who wants to get into this field, right? Like,
yeah. Well,
yeah.
there's the other side. I mean, you don't have kids. I do.
No,
I've got a 20-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old son, almost 13, 10-year-old son. It's been interesting just over the course of that 20-year span of having kids grow up. And, if anyone doesn't think that the kids today are like YouTube can cause brain rot on some level. Like my younger kids, like they will sit, and my daughter too, the oldest, they'll sit there and watch things on video way past the point where I think, like, if you didn't grow up in that time frame and you're like us, in your 30s or
Yeah.
40s or whatever, it doesn't seem as bad. But you take someone who's raised in that, and all of a sudden, like, and we don't let my kids get on the computers and screens all the time. Like, we definitely don't do that. And they're still like, it's like this constant thing. And I see their friends that it sounds like all they do is get on the screens and just stare at them for hours. And what will the ramifications of that be 20 years down the road for this generation? And I don't think it's going to be good. And I don't think things like ChatGPT are going to make it any better. It's kind of scary to see how much things have already declined in some areas. I don't want to be like doom and gloom. Like, there are tools, and you have to actively work against things that are blocking this. But I mentioned calculators earlier. It's like, yeah, a sixth grader with a calculator can do more math, especially a complex calculator, not, a scientific one, can do more math and complexity than, someone in the 1700s could. The greatest minds would take weeks to do similar problems. But it's like, yeah, but those calculators were built off of what those minds created. And
Yeah.
if we all have calculators growing up, will that catapult us forward and we'll start higher up, or will it just mean that we never learn to understand? I mean, I've read sci-fi stories. One was like, I think there's somehow a guy gets in the future and like humanity is basically falling apart and no one knows how to do anything. And the deal was like computers and robots and AI and whatnot took over and did everything for so long. And then when they started falling apart, no one knew how to fix them. I mean,
That sounds
it's
very
a real
similar.
possibility.
Yeah, that sounds. Are you talking about The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster?
I don't even know. It's been a long time.
Okay.
I think it was a short story I read, and I probably read it in my teens.
Yeah,
I used to
sounds
chug a lot of.
it sounds very similar. So this The Machine Stops is the only sci-fi short story that E.M. Forster
That
ever
does
wrote.
sound familiar.
It was published in 1918, and the whole premise is that humans did something to the surface of the world that made it uninhabitable. And apparently, if you went up there, it would kill you, right? So humans, the entirety of human civilization has been living underground in like these honeycomb-shaped like pods or like private living whatevers, right? And in every single dwelling, there is a machine, and that's what you use for communication. It makes the water, it makes your air, it makes your
This is like
food.
Fallout.
Yes.
Does their water processing chip go bad? I actually this
the
is not
whole
the story
system
that
shut
I
down.
read,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like The Matrix, right? Except this
Yep.
is like 1918 style. And I remember reading that was with my cyberpunk fiction class that I taught several years ago. That was the first story that we read, and all of my students who had grown up, like they grew up with the internet, with iPhones, with all these displays, all of this high tech stuff. They just were like, Miss Nelius, you scared us. That's like exactly like the internet today. And I'm like, let's unpack that a little bit, right?
Yep.
So the whole message of Forster's story is that people relied on these machines for so long, but nobody knew how they worked. Nobody understood how to fix them when they break down. And the machine Bible that everybody had was like super, super thick. Nobody understood it, right? So I kind of took that as a message as to the over-reliance on technology. And I feel that ChatGPT, AI technologies that are just like it or similar to it, it has the potential, if misused, to get us to that point like The Machine Stops.
Yep.
So
All right, let's do my benchmarks. Since I
Yes.
said that in the title, we'd talk about it. Benchmarks. This is a high resolution Stable Diffusion. This is not the default. Part of the repetition that you see starts to come because it's a high resolution. But I'll just show this slide and talk about it here. This is the standard Stable Diffusion models, running at 512 by 512 image generation and doing 100 steps, and how many iterations per second. So, basically, if you did 100 iterations per second, that would mean 1 second to generate an image. You can improve the throughput over this, what I show here, but you can see this is after searching for projects that would work better. So there's Stable Diffusion Web UI is on GitHub, maintained by Automatic 1111. That's what I used for NVIDIA cards. If you replace the PyTorch, the Torch DLLs with newer versions from NVIDIA, you can get a nice boost to performance. So they went from like 20-ish on the 4090 up to, you can see, 29. And then I actually had some other people say, hey, on a 4090 under Linux using, I guess the software maybe is better optimized that way. I don't know. But someone said they were able to get up into the 40 range on a 4090. So, if you're talking about generating thousands of images and picking out a few good ones, they can happen really fast. AMD's 7900 cards, actually all the AMD cards, were tested on a different project called Stable Diffusion Shark, I think. It's from nod.ai. It was one of the few that I could get running on Windows. I actually tried... Previously, I did some testing of AMD's 6000 series under Linux. I'll show a slide on that in a moment, using the web UI version, but that didn't seem to be as optimized. But you'll notice there's this huge gap between the 7000 and the 6000 AMD cards. Nod AI says that Shark's models, or their models, or whoever's models, they've got tuned models for the RDNA 3. They do not have tuned models on 6000 series. They expect the 6000 series performance could double. Okay. The 3000 series and the 4000 series from NVIDIA, numbers look pretty reasonable, like comparing each to the other, and you go, okay, a 3090 Ti is maybe a little bit a little bit slower than the 4070 Ti. But if you don't use the Xformers, which I guess I didn't highlight that in the chart, I said it in the article. Xformers is a tool created by Facebook that helps make better utilization of resources, I guess. I don't know if it's just for NVIDIA. I think it's supposed to be more open than that, but you can run Xformers with the NVIDIA cards, and so that's what the gray bar or the black bar versus the green bar. Xformers has a loss in precision. Doesn't really seem to affect the output to human eyes. Maybe on some finer level stuff, finer details, it would matter more. Anyway, lots of numbers up there. Also, we've got previous generation cards, the RTX 20 series. And this is kind of interesting too, because look at the 2080 Ti, got 12.5 iterations per second. If you look at the green RTX 30 series, that lands between the 3070 Ti and 3080. Pretty good, actually.
Wow.
And what's curious is, like, how did they get to that level with the 20 series card? The 5000 series from AMD didn't do well. The GTX card did really poorly. In fact, and so this gets me
Shocking.
Well, no, but this is interesting. So look at this. I think this is the one. Nope. I went too far. This slide. This shows theoretical performance on FP16 compute. And there's two bars on the NVIDIA cards on the newer NVIDIA cards, because the 30 series and the 40 series have sparsity. And sparsity is basically like skip multiplications by zero is effectively what it means. Okay? With sparsity, the 4090 is getting 661 teraflops. Without it, it's 330. So go down to the 3070 Ti, and it's 174 teraflops with sparsity. Without sparsity, it's 88 teraflops. Look back at this slide now. So 12.5 on the 2080 Ti, which does not support sparsity, and its teraflops is like 120 compared to the 3070 Ti. And what you get is you're like, and I talked to one developer's like, yeah, I don't think sparsity is actually helping in these projects. So that was interesting. He said, he's like, I feel it's more marketing than real substance.
Yeah.
I'm like, I mean, I know like projects or the code has to be aware of it. Maybe this just wasn't written to take advantage of the sparsity option. I don't know. But like when you look at the theoretical potential versus the real world performance, you get a pretty big difference. You know, here, at least by these
Yeah.
numbers, NVIDIA's best, the 4090, is only 40, maybe 50% faster than the 7900 XT. But if you look at this theoretical stuff, you go, well, gosh, it's at least 3 times faster. And with sparsity, it's potentially like 5 or 6 times faster. Is it just a lack of optimizations? I don't know. But one thing,
Yeah.
final thing, I'm talking a lot here.
No,
The
no,
final thing is high resolution testing. I couldn't test the 7000 series because this was done under Linux and I could not get Linux to work on the 7000 series. Good times. I wasted half a day doing that. But you can see now the newer cards seem to do much better. So with the higher resolution, it was able to maybe better hit the theoretical performance and throughput. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm like, okay, there are workloads as it gets more complex. The tensor cores warm up and they're happy and they do cool stuff. So, lots of benchmarks. NVIDIA rules the roost right now in the AI space on consumer cards, partly because AMD hasn't really cared too much. Even Intel, though, like their theoretical performance that you see here, this is using their matrix cores. And then you go to their real world performance and you're like, oh yeah, they kind of suck. Intel getting it running was hard. I had to use another different project using OpenVINO, lack of optimizations. But we talk about all these tools that are being created like ChatGPT, and it's like, yeah, there's companies that are going to look at stuff like this or the T-flop stuff, and they're going to be like, yeah, let's optimize the heck out of our models and make them run faster so we can do AI better. And it's all just math. Fun times.
And then they're gonna look at the cost and be like, "Oh my god, we have to pay that much so we can get this machine to make this many images in this amount of time. Like, why don't we? I don't know, get a human to do it." Like,
So this is interesting too. Is like this is on Stable Diffusion, right? The models on this, I want to say, like to do the high resolution model. Required more memory. I think it needed somewhere around 6 to 8 gigabytes of VRAM. ChatGPT's model supposedly needs 800, 900 gigabytes of information in memory. Like, yes, it could be stored on a fast SSD, but pulling it out of memory or off of storage and all that would be super, super slow and your performance would tank. So they're running it on clusters of probably A100 cards, maybe even H100 if you get the new stuff. You got to put together a nice little server with a bunch of professional Hopper or Ampere cards, the ones that cost $10,000, $15,000 a card. But you can basically train something like ChatGPT on a cluster of eight professional GPUs, and it will cost you maybe 150 to 200K. I don't know.
yay, that's a lot.
Well, that's like 2 or 3 employees is probably what some bean counter is going to say.
Yeah, for like a year too. But then it's also like, how many actual companies do you think understand what it really means to integrate like this high level of technicality into creating AI generated content?
This is my thought is like on some level, it's a brave new world. And
Yeah.
like, there's going to be companies that figure out how to do this effectively, and they'll probably make a lot of money off of it too. There's going to be companies that do it really poorly and it's going to all fall apart and make them look bad. Will CNET be seen as a pioneer? Probably not, because they did it poorly.
Yeah.
Plagiarizing, factual errors, all of those things, like, you don't want that. But maybe the next gen models start to get better. I don't know. I think it's going to be one of these things where companies are going to have to figure out how to use AI effectively. Outside, I mean, inside and outside of journalism, there will be
Mm-hmm.
uses for this, and it's kind of like it's like ray tracing in graphics cards. It's there now. There haven't been a lot of good
Yeah.
examples of how to do it really well, right? It's like, okay, if you build it, they will come. We're still waiting for people to build those ray tracing games that actually blow us away. We're also still waiting for these AI tools that will reach the level where it blows us away. But I mean, in the coming years,
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to stop this. I don't know how you stop it. There's going to be people and companies that are going to invest in this heavily, no matter what you or I say. And if I worked for them, they would probably end up firing me at some point and replacing me with an AI. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also important to realize like if we look at and I'm going to bring up open AI, right?
Yeah.
There's also, I think, an onus of responsibility on these companies to make sure that they are not only ethically developing this stuff, but also creating a tool that would be pretty darn hard to use in an unethical way, because again, it's a tool. People are going to do with it what they're going to do with it. But when it comes to let's see, looking at this this exclusive in time that was published on January 18th, so not that long ago, but said exclusive. OpenAI used Kenyan workers on less than $2 per hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. And the article goes on to describe that for $2 an hour, these individuals had to watch some of the most horrendous things you could probably see on the internet, much in the same way that content moderators for Facebook, Twitter, all that sort of thing get exposed to things like gore, child abuse, a lot of stuff like that. So it's like I
Literally the worst job.
literally the worst job, and you're using labor in another country for $2 an hour to do that, right? So me personally, like, this is my personal opinion. um how can you say that something was made to be used ethically when the way that it was created was unethical? There's
Yep.
some meat for your brains. So, but like all technologies, they are tools, right? I think the best way, like our mindset of how we need to think about using AI, is how can we use AI to improve the tools that we already have, not replacing the work of a living, breathing person, right? So if we think about the typewriter, right? It was invented to make writing faster, right? And then we got computers and that transferred over to that. So like that made typing faster. But what we're doing with OpenAI and GPT is taking that skill away from humans, which is a totally different arena than just like taking a landline and improving the technology so far into what is now a smartphone, right? And I
Yeah.
do love your benchmarks, Jared. I do. I really, really do.
And it's, I mean, this is the thing is I'm going to be going back to like, I've been looking for a good AI benchmark for a while. This is not it. I
Yeah.
like, if you look at those charts, I hope no one takes those charts out of context and says Nvidia is only 50% faster than AMD, or look how good AMD has done, or like, it's too soon to draw any firm conclusions, because I'm like going, I think the Nod AI performance of the 7000 series is probably really well tuned.
Mm-hmm.
I think everything else is very questionable. And I'm like, yeah, I bet if the right people, the right programmers who know more about programming than I do for sure, and they sit there and tune those models, they can probably boost performance a lot closer to the theoretical performance numbers that I showed as well. So, and we've got things like Google's tensor cores, their tensor processing units. They do similar type of workloads. Those will probably be used in different ways. So, what we need is models that people actually want to run.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Stable Diffusion's kind of fun, or whether it's Stable
Yeah.
Diffusion or Midjourney or DALI or whatever. Like, it can be kind of fun. You throw a prompt at it and you refine your prompt and you try and get it to create an image that you sort of like. Shutterstock is now offering AI generated images. I don't know how that's going to work. I guess they own the rights to the images that the AI was trained off of. So maybe that's less of a problem with ethics. But at the same time, like
Maybe. Yeah.
if the artist that helped train the AI with their
Mm-hmm.
work no longer gets a cut,
Yeah.
and
Um,
I mean, yeah, you can't get good images very easily. I mean, like let me show this slide again. The final slide with this is basically doing 1080p images, and the quality. I mean, like you saw the images at the start. The quality, I would say, it's not the best ever, but it can be pretty cool and fun and whatnot. And you're talking about where 512 by 512 images generate in 2 or 3 seconds on a 4090. And here we're talking about more like 10 seconds. And this is not maybe the ideal way of doing it either. So it's like it's
mhm.
really easy to think about cases where it's like, oh yeah, you're probably looking more like for Shutterstock images that are like 4,000 pixels wide. I'm like, you could be talking minutes to generate a single image. So,
Yeah.
so I mean, it's a lot of number crunching and processing that happens just to generate a single image. And I did some tests as well. I guess I didn't put together a chart, but I did some tests showing, like, if you do four 512 by 512 images at the same time, it gets better scaling on the faster GPUs because it's able to utilize those
Mm-hmm.
tensor cores and other things better. But
Yeah.
anyway, it's all interesting on some level. It's fun to write about for me and fun to see, but also a little worrisome because I look at the bigger
Yeah.
picture and I'm like, man, what is this actually going to do to humanity 20, 50, 100 years down the road? I won't be here to see it in 100 years, and probably not even 50. But my kids will, and I hope
Yeah.
things get better. Anyway,
Yeah. Same. Quickly, going back to you brought up Shutterstock and
it's made
the
of
Dark
people.
Circle. Yeah, 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 it is. I mean, without like, I think something that I always try to keep into perspective. And Ziv also made an interesting comment about taking the skills away from humans will be okay once there is some higher level process for us to focus on. And I'm trying to think of like examples of that. And the first one that kind of stands out into my mind are switchboard operators, right? In the early 20th century, right? We automated that entire system through technology. And all of those jobs got taken away from it, right? Without doing the historical research into that, like I just wonder like how that sort of job displacement affected that demographic of switchboard operators who were mostly, if not solely, women at the time, right? I think ideally we would want to create this path for people to like learn the technology at the same time as they're building and improving on other skill sets, So then that way that makes the transition easier. Like I don't have any answers, but I think the way that it's going right now with CNET and everything else, like I don't think that's the way it should go. Like that's what we don't want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, there's also, like, if you talk about switchboard operators, I mean,
Mhm.
to me, that sounds like a horrible job, right? Like,
Yeah.
people did it because it was a job. I'm like, I actually, like, being a journalist and writing and doing that stuff is actually a pretty stimulating job. You're
Mhm.
reading a lot, you're researching, your brain is actively engaged. You're not just, like, sitting there plugging things in, except for graphics cards, all day
Yeah.
long. And so it's like, jobs where it's like, yeah, we got rid of human drudgery and replaced it by automation. I'm like, I'm far more okay with that. But we're now definitely creeping into that area where AI
Mhm.
can displace jobs that aren't drudgery, that people actually do
Yeah.
enjoy. And then you're going, well, that's not really as nice, is it? When do we replace professional athletes with robots?
Yeah.
Actually, there's what's the company? Boston Robotics, Boston something,
Boston Dynamics. Is that
Boston
it?
Dynamics. There
Yeah.
you go. Like, they have a video of a pretty crazy one where the guy's like, imagine you're working on a scaffolding and you forgot your hammer or something, and they have this robot, like, climbs up the scaffold, gets the hammer or whatever it is, climbs up, hands it to them, then runs across this thing and does like a triple or double flip off of it and stuff. And it's like, the fact that it's doing flips at all is where I'm like going, wow, like, that's pretty crazy. And so, I mean, I don't know. Watching football played by robots, if the robots were good, might be entertaining on some level, but
Dude,
I
it'd be
don't.
like battle bots.
That's right.
My
Modern
cousin
bots.
builds those and like competitively does that, but there's still, like a human behind it, right?
Yeah.
You know, um,
And when they
yeah.
start, when the machines start training themselves and getting better, that's where, I mean, we all know the Skynet and Terminator story, and it was,
Hmm.
that's hopefully the worst case scenario, and hopefully it doesn't happen. But AI
When
is
they
not,
gain sentience, that's when,
or when
you
they think
know,
they gain sentience, the algorithms think they're sentient. That's all it
yeah,
needs.
yeah.
Well, hope you guys enjoyed the show. Thanks for coming on, Joanna. Good to see
Thank
you, and
you. Thanks for having
hopefully we
me.
keep hopefully we keep writing until we retire and aren't replaced by computers and AI chatbots.
Dude, I hope I die before that happens. I'm
I
just
know,
like,
like, it
yeah. Mm-mm.
would be really sad. Anyway, we will see you guys all next time.